Hello everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Kickstarter Weekly. This episode is going to cover games that are funding during the period November 15th through the 21st. This is going to be a bit of a longer video because I have 19 different games to talk about today. Only 5 of those are games that are currently running. I also have 3 games that I personally backed from last week's video, so I'll mention those. And then I have a bunch of games that I acquired, and I will talk about those, but those may be briefer mentions because I may not have as much to talk about games that I haven't actually played yet. However, I do have 2 games that I have played this period as well, and so I will talk about those 2 games probably more at length than the games that I backed and the games that I acquired. So of the 5 currently running games that I'm going to be talking about today, 1 of them is funding on November 16th, 2 of them are funding on November 18th, and 2 of them are funding on November 19th. Which means 1 of those games is funding on Tuesday of this week, 2 of them are funding on Thursday, and 2 of them are funding on Friday. The first game that I'm going to be talking about is called Caral. That game is going to fund on Tuesday, November 16th. They had a minimum required funding goal of $40,000. At the time of me making this video, they're sitting at $75,000, which is just under about 2 times the minimum required funding goal. Now, Caral is a game for 2 to 4 players. It plays in about 1 to 2 hours. The complexity on this game is about medium light, and we're going to set the risk at medium low. So what's this game about? Well, it's a city building game by the designer of Carcassonne. So in keeping with games like that, there are 6 different modules in this game, and you can add various modules as you like. I think the appeal of games that are designed like this allow people to play the base game without a lot of other stuff added onto it, see how they like it, kind of understand it, get their, footing on that ground, and then as they enjoy the game and they want to kind of ramp up the difficulty or the variability, they can add in more of these modules, and sometimes many modules at once. So the city building part of this game is going to be pyramids that players are building, and they'll also be using movement points to do basically a race against the other players. So they're kind of racing to get to the center of the board and building pyramids along the way. As I mentioned, this game is designed by Klaus-Jürgen Ried, and he has designed, among other things, Carcassonne, Carcassonne the Castle, Carcassonne the City, Carcassonne Hunters and Gatherers, and The Downfall of Pompeii. And the artist on this game is Hendrik Noack, and he has worked on Feed the Kraken, Glenmore 2 Chronicles, and Mosaic: A Story of Civilization. Funtails is the publisher on this game, and they have previously published Feed the Kraken, Glenmore 2 Chronicles, and Quiz Club. Now there are 3 different pledge levels for Caral. I should also mention, when I talk about the various pledge levels of games, I don't include things like the $1 or $5 buy-in for the pledge manager. I don't include print and play pledge levels. On the other side, I also don't include retailer pledge levels or group pledge levels. And then if there are pledge levels that are for very specific kind of vanity items, like where you're having something that's very specific to you, and they're only doing a few copies of those games, and oftentimes they're very expensive, I don't include those pledge levels either. So the pledge levels that I'm talking about are geared for the individual consumer, and I generally don't include pledge levels where there are less than 100 copies. So if something's limited to like 3 copies or 10 copies because it's very specific and it's filled with these kind of vanity extras that they don't have a lot of, I don't cover those pledge levels. Now for Caral, there are 3 pledge levels. The first is for $58. It's called Caral Basic, and that's going to be the retail version of the game. So it's the same game that you'll be able to buy later at retail. Theoretically here, you're getting it at a better price, but oftentimes with Kickstarter, you're paying for shipping. And if you were to buy the game at retail, or if you were to buy it from a discount retailer like Card House or Cool Stuff Inc. or Game Nerds or Miniature Market, usually with those companies, you can buy a few games and hit a minimum shipping level, and then you get free shipping. So when you're considering buying something that's just the retail version, I think oftentimes those costs kind of cancel out. So you're going to pay more if you get it through Kickstarter because you're going to have to pay for the shipping. But on the flip side, you're theoretically getting the game sooner than the retail copies. It doesn't always work out that way, but theoretically. Also, it's your chance to help support a publisher that you really like and keep them in business. But for my money, I normally don't back kind of stripped down retail versions of the game on Kickstarter. Usually if I want to back it, I want to get the versions that have more bling to it and kind of more stuff. And I think that's where Kickstarter really shines. So for $98, you can plunge Caral Deluxe, and that is the deluxe version of the game. It's going to include a deluxe box and components, 45 different plastic miniature pyramid pieces. So you won't have those pieces in the basic version of the game. You'll just have, probably cardboard tokens. Also with the deluxe version, you're going to get a deluxe inlay or insert, kind of like a game trays insert, but it's not game trays in this case. And you'll also be getting 2 figures, kind of miniatures figures that you won't be getting in the standard retail version of the game. The third pledge level is $121. It's called the Deluxe All-In. So it's going to take the components in the deluxe version and it's going to add some things onto that. That includes a starting player mini, which will essentially replace whatever starting player token they have in the other version of the game. Some promo cards, 2 special upgraded dice, and sleeves for all of the cards in the game. And finally, Funtails is aiming to deliver Caral in September of 2022. The first of 2 games that are going to complete their funding on November the 18th, which is Thursday, is Gartenbau. Now, Gartenbau had a minimum required funding goal of $12,000. They're currently sitting at $19,000, which is about 1.5 times that minimum required funding goal. Gartenbau is a game for 2 to 4 players. It plays in about 30 to 60 minutes. It has a light complexity, and we're going to set the risk on this one at medium-high. Now, this is a combination pattern building and tile placement game, and players are going to be drafting cards which they'll place in a tableau. So it says tile placement, it's really card placement, but it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's the same thing essentially. So you're going to be placing those in a tableau and then pursuing various scoring opportunities. Gartenbau was designed by David Abelson, who's previously designed a game called Intel, and Alex Johns, and this is going to be Alex Johns' first published game. Now there are 2 artists on Gartenbau. The first is Matt Paquette, and he has previously worked on Mariposas, Mystic Vale, and Thunderstone Quest. The second artist is Todd Sanders, and he has previously worked on Mr. Cabbagehead's Garden, Small City, and Trick of the Rails. And Gartenbau is being published by 25th Century Games, and they have previously published Kohaku, Ra, and Space Explorers. Now there's only 1 pledge for this game. It is a $49 pledge. It is called Gardener, and that's it. So if you want this game, that is what you are pledging. One last thing I perhaps should have mentioned at the top is that when I'm talking about the various pledge levels, I am talking about them in terms of US dollars. And I do not include shipping because, I don't know who may be watching this. Shipping's usually one cost for the continental United States. It's higher costs for Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. And of course, it's completely variable costs for the rest of the world. So kind of like Rodney Smith, I leave that for you to discover on your own. And just to be kind of consistent, I talk about everything in terms of US dollars, and I'm giving you the prices, not including shipping costs. And just like with Caral, 25th Century Games is aiming to deliver Gartenbau in September of 2022. The second game that is going to be funding on Thursday, November 18th is Power Plants. Power Plants had a minimum required funding goal of $32,000. They're currently sitting at $64,000, which is just about exactly 2 times that minimum required funding goal. This is a game for 1 to 5 players. It plays in about 25 to 60 minutes. It's a little bit of an odd number, 25 to 60 minutes. The complexity here is medium heavy. We're going to set the risk here at medium low. And gameplay-wise, what you're looking at with Power Plants is area majority and tile placement. Power Plants is designed by Adam E. Dalton, who previously designed Kahuna and Ninja Camp. And the artist on Power Plants is Apolline Etienne, and she has previously worked on Fossilis, Muse, and Wreck Raiders. And this game is being published by Kids Table BG. They have previously published Fossilis, Picnic Attack of the Ants, and Wreck Raiders. The other thing to know about Kids Table BG is they are essentially the same entity as Burnt Island Games. Burnt Island Games put out games like In the Hall of the Mountain King, more recently Fall of the Mountain King, and the more recent updating Endeavor Age of Sail. So when they're making their games that are aimed more at adults, they use their Burnt Island Games shingle, and then when they're producing games that are aimed at families and kids, they use the Kids Table BG shingle. Now, I can personally say that I have backed Fossilis in the past, and I've played it, and it's an amazing game. And I think what they did so well with that game, which I'm assuming that they're going to do here, is they created a game that can be scaled back for kids. And there's even like icons in different cards. So if you want to take out cards in Fossilis that have take that on them, cards that may upset certain children or younger children, Kids Table BG makes it very easy to do that. And they also have a lot of different modules that you can add into Fossilis, so you can play the base game with your kids, kind of tailor it to their needs, and then as they grow with it and they kind of want more game, you can add in various different modules. And I think the production and the way that they implemented the design in Fossilis was so good. It's really a great game that can be very custom designed for your children. But it's a really good game for adults too. And as an adult who does not have children, I really enjoy Fossilis. I think it's a great game. So I just wanted to put that out there if you don't really know Kids Table BG or you're kind of wondering what their approach is going to be towards this game. So I think it's going to be very well designed for children, but it's got a lot going on and there's a crunchiness there that if you kind of use all the various different parts of the game, it's really good for gamers too. So we have two different pledge levels for Power Plants. The first is $28. It is the retail edition. And that's going to be the version of the game that just doesn't have a lot of the extra bling to it. Now for $44, you can get the deluxe edition, and that's going to have a lot of upgrades and extras. You've got UV spot on the box. With the deluxe version, there's 225 different tokens in the game. Now, in the retail version, those are just going to be unexciting cardboard tokens, but in the deluxe version, those are all upgraded to wooden tokens. Also in the deluxe version, there's a draw bag that you're going to be using in the game that will have silkscreen printing on it for the deluxe version. There's also extra cards in the deluxe version. There are some extra tokens, so it's going to be extra kind of little mini gameplay mechanics that you don't have in the retail version of the game. There are also 2 mini expansions and a custom insert. So again, kind of like a game trays thing, but not game trays, but a custom insert, and that is in the deluxe version only. And just like with the other 2 games that we've talked about today, Kids Table BG is shooting to deliver Power Plants in September of 2022. Now from there, we move to City of the Great Machine, and this is the first of 2 games that we'll be funding on Friday, November 19th. This had a minimum required funding goal of $23.5 thousand. They're currently sitting at $112,000, which is about 4.5 times that minimum required funding goal. City of the Great Machine plays 2 to 4 players. Games should take about 1 to 1.5 hours. The complexity here looks to be about medium light, and we're going to set the risk involved on this campaign at medium high. So thematically, this game is a technocratic Victorian steampunk theme, and it's a hidden movement game. But unlike a lot of hidden movement games, like the Fury of Dracula games or the Whitehall Mystery games where you're looking for Jack the Ripper, in those games, everyone is searching for one thing, one creature, whether it's Jack the Ripper or Fury of Dracula. And there's usually one person controlling that entity and kind of moving it around, and all of the other players are searching for it. This is a little bit different. It's a one versus many game. So essentially you're still going to have a game master type character, and then you're going to have between 1 and 3 other players playing opposite that game master character. However, in this game, it's the other characters, the other players, that are going to be trying to hide from the person playing the one. So it kind of flips it around. In this game, the one is going to be searching for the hidden movement of all of the other players that they're playing against. German Takamarov is the designer on City of the Great Machine, and he has previously designed such games as Deranged, Gravity Falls, and Terminator Salvation. And then there are 6 different artists who are working on this game. However, this appears to be the first published game for all 6 artists. They are Stanislav Gordiev, Anna Laryushina, Maya Kirkully, Nikolai Mitrukin, Igor Pankin, and Nadazoa Penkrak. And the publisher here is Crowd Games, who has previously produced Artbox, Deep State New World Order, and Space Explorers. Now, there are 2 different pledge levels for City of the Great Machine. The first is a $60 pledge. It is called the Regular Edition, and that will get you the core version of the game, along with the machine enhancement and the Oracle Zeppelin module. If you want to get more stuff for this game, you're going to want to look at the $90 pledge level, which is called Master of the City. That's going to include the same things from the previous level and then add in the following: the Stand-in Heroes expansion, the Servants of the Great Machine module, and the Surveillance Zeppelin module. And finally, Crowd Games is aiming to deliver City of the Great Machine in November of 2022. So that brings us to the final currently running Kickstarter campaign. It is also funding on November the 19th, which is Friday. It's a game called Monsterapocalypse Board Game. Now, they had a minimum required funding of $100,000. They're currently sitting at around $748,000, which is about 7.5 times that minimum required funding goal. This is a game for 2 to 4 players. It plays in about 1 to 1.5 hours. The complexity here appears to be medium light, and we're going to set the risk on this campaign at medium high. Now, this is a miniatures fighting game, and it uses dice rolling. It's also got various player powers. But the interesting thing is that there was a Monsterapocalypse card game before, and this is sort of a board game version of that, board game adaptation. So instead of just cards, you're going to have a board, and you're going to have a lot of different miniatures depending on what extras you get for it. But it is a miniatures fighting version of the previously produced card game by the same designer and publisher. So the designer is Matt Wilson, and as I said, he previously designed Monsterapocalypse, which is just a card game. He also designed War Machine and War Machine Prime MK2. Now, unfortunately, I can't really tell you who the artists are. They're not listed anywhere. They're not listed on Board Game Geek. They're not listed in the Kickstarter campaign. Generally, when I'm talking about games and posting them on my website, Think Outside the Board, if they don't have designers and artists, it's one of the things that makes me not list them. I like to have everyone credited. However, in this case, I am featuring this game anyway. I do know that the card game had 15 different artists associated with it, and I think that's too many to talk about here, particularly because I don't know if all 15 of those artists are working on this. It may be a case where all 15 artists have their work in this game, but because the original game was a card game, it had a lot of card art, it's entirely possible that whatever art they kind of brought over to this board game version only represents a few of those artists. It could even be all new art. I just don't know. And I just feel like I can't really mention the 15 artists that are associated with the card game version of the game. I can tell you, though, that it is published by Mythic Games, and they are best known for Mythic Battles Pantheon, Super Fantasy Brawl, and Time of Legends Joan of Arc. Now, there are 3 different pledge levels associated with this campaign. The first is for $59. It's called Veteran, but it doesn't include the actual core version of the game. It is just for 3 to 4 players. And so it's going to include some extras if you want to play the game at 3 to 4 players and you already have the base version of the game, which is specifically designed for 1 to 2 players. Now, if you pledge at the $119 pledge level, which is called Smasher Pledge, that says that it's for 1 to 2 players. That is essentially the core version of the game. So with that pledge, you will get the core game, and you will get a promo mini for Mythic Games headquarters. So they're going to be buildings in this game, plastic buildings, and this is just a promo building that looks like the publisher's headquarters. So they're putting themselves in the game. And then finally, for $159, you can pledge the Crusher pledge level. That again is for 3 to 4 players, and that's going to give you everything in the 2 previous pledges. So all of the base game stuff for 1 to 2 players, plus all of the additional stuff that can bring it up to 3 to 4 players. Now here's the thing, even if you pledge that level, there's still a lot of things that you're not getting. And the reason for that is there are a ton of expansions, add-ons that are not in any pledge level. So I'm going to talk about those very quickly and kind of outline what they are. For $15, you can get Map Pack 1, which is a double-sided board, 2 different variations for you to play on. For $29, you can add on Wreckberg, and what that is essentially building miniatures. So if you don't get that, you won't have building miniatures, and if you do get that, you can supplement other expansions with building miniatures, or just use them in the base game. From there, we've got 6 different expansions. 5 of them are priced at $35, and each of them is going to include various miniatures, some kind of factions, extra cards and things, and then 4 new bosses. But each one is kind of its own pack. It's got a lot of stuff in it. So there is Drake Uprising, Mutant Menace, Frosttide, Rising Realities, and Simian Corp. And then there's a 6th expansion, but it's a little bit more expensive. It is a $45 price tag. It's called Battle Royale, and the reason that it's more is that instead of having 4 monsters, it has 5, but they are called Apex monsters, so they're going to be more powerful than the other monsters, and I think the miniatures are going to be a little bigger as well. So if you want to kind of go all in and get everything that's available here, you're going to want to pledge that $159 pledge level and then add on all of that other stuff. The map pack, the 6 expansions, and the terrain expansion. And if you add all of those things together, you're looking at $423, and that does not include the shipping, remember. Finally, Mythic Games is aiming to deliver Monsterapocalypse, the board game, in November of 2022. So that wraps the 5 currently running Kickstarters that I wanted to talk to you about today. And now I'm going to briefly talk about the 3 games that I personally pledged from last week's video. The first of those is Circadians Chaos Order plus First Light 2nd Edition. And if you didn't watch last week's video, this is another series by Gartenbau Games. They're the ones who do Raiders of the North Sea, all of the North Sea games, all of the West Kingdom games, and now they have just announced a new trilogy, the Of the South Sea series. They also plan to do a North trilogy, so by the time they're all said and done, they're going to have 12 different games in that series, so kind of 4 related trilogies. However, they've also produced another trilogy of games. It is a science fiction themed trilogy of games. The first one, Circadians First Light, was a worker placement game, whereas the new game, Chaos Order, is the main mechanic there is more action drafting. But I really like Gartenbau Games games. They're really, really good. They're very solid. So for me, it's pretty much an insta-back. And I didn't back First Light the first time around. It was just this side series, kind of like a new series for them. And I think I was pledging one of their other games at the same time and a lot of other stuff. So I let that one slide, knowing that it was a trilogy and I would have a chance later on to kind of jump on and hopefully get multiple games at once, maybe save a little bit on shipping at the same time. And that's exactly what I did pledging this one. I also backed Lords of Ragnarok, which was on GameFound and not Kickstarter. And that was sort of a re-implementation of Lords of Hellas, but not completely. So it was designed by the same designer, Adam Kwapinski. There is a kind of theme shift going from Hellas to Ragnarok. So Ragnarok is more Norse gods. I believe Hellas was Greek gods. And they started with a lot of the same mechanics and the same gameplay, but it's not just a straight reskin. Even though they started with the same mechanics, there are a bunch of new mechanics that are implemented for Ragnarok. So I don't own Lords of Hellas. I wasn't really backing Kickstarter games back when that campaign ran, and I'm a completist. So I always want to buy all the stuff. I don't really like to buy a retail version of a Kickstarter game later, especially if it's one that's missing a lot of the extras, a lot of the kind of expansion modules and things like that. I want to get everything. And Lords of Hellas is a game that, it's kind of hard to track down in its entirety. I was actually hoping that they would have Lords of Hellas in this campaign, and I was going to consider picking up both games if they did. That could be a little bit risky because, not having played Ragnarok yet, I don't really know exactly how much overlap there is. So I went all in on Ragnarok. I got all the stuff. And then as far as Hellas goes, I guess I'll have to consider in the future adding that to my collection as well. Maybe they'll do another Lords of Hellas Kickstarter in the future and they'll do a new edition of it. I've only played Lords of Hellas once. I like it. So I guess I'll also need to, at that point, play Ragnarok and then kind of make a determination for myself whether I need both or whether having one game is enough. Either way, though, I do not own Lords of Hellas right now, so pledging Lords of Ragnarok for me was kind of a no-brainer. I thought that would be a very good addition to my collection. I also pledged Marvel Dice Throne, so that was the third and final game that I pledged last week. Now, I own both versions of Dice Throne, the kind of battle chests that were put out previously. One of them is called Dice Throne Season 1 Rerolled. The other one is just called Dice Throne Season 2 Battle Chest. But each one is sort of a collection of 8 different characters in a box, and it's a variety pack. I also own Dice Throne Adventures, where you can take those Dice Throne characters that are normally used in kind of 1v1 or a round robin, a bunch of people kind of all having a free-for-all, or teams, or you can even use some of the big boss characters in Dice Throne Adventures and do a one versus many game. But if you play Dice Throne Adventures the way it was meant to be played, you're going to bring those Dice Throne characters into Dice Throne Adventures and take them on a dungeon crawl. So you started with a game that was kind of 1v1 and all of these different variations of fighting games, different permutations, and they made that into a dungeon crawler, a cooperative game, which was awesome. And Dice Throne Adventures right now is sitting at the number 3 spot on my top games of 2021. So I really like Dice Throne in general. And it's funny because I'm more of a heavier gamer, but Dice Throne is so good at implementing dice rolling and tokens and a variety of mechanics so that even though it's a very lighter, kind of intuitive game, there are choices to be made that are impactful, and you are creating a little bit of an engine as you go. It's a lot of fun, Dice Throne. So for me, pledging a new offering from them was almost a given, and the fact that it was Marvel just adds a little bit more incentive, I guess. I love Marvel. I was a comic book reader since I was a kid, and they only have 8 characters in this new version, but I think it's sort of testing the waters to see if people are going to like it. There are a bunch of Marvel-themed games out there, perhaps so many that they're kind of eating into each other's audiences. So we'll have to see how this does and if Dice Throne and Marvel want to put out more stuff. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see more characters in the future, more Marvel characters, more campaigns, more collections, and I wouldn't even be surprised if we see a Marvel version of Dice Throne Adventures that is a co-op, a dungeon crawler that has the kind of resources and all of the different things in the game that are more themed towards the Marvel universe. If they did that, I would also definitely have to consider picking that up as well. Dice Throne is just so good. So those are the 3 games that I personally pledged from last week's video, but I also acquired 9 new games this period. I had an order that I put in a while ago for a pre-order for Anno 1800, and they just never sent it to me. I had to email them again once the pre-order came in to tell them it was okay to release the package and send it. And there was a bit of a miscommunication there, and I didn't do that. So I just got it recently. It is a bunch of things, and it also includes a lot of unmatched expansions. So the first game here on this list is Anno 1800. It is the new Martin Wallace game. I am a huge fan of Martin Wallace. The Brass games are some of my favorite games, as is Age of Steam, as is Railways of the World, as is Australia. I also recently backed the Tinner's Trail, the new edition that Alley Cat Games put out. I don't like Tinner's Trail as much. I think it has some mechanics in common with Australia, and I prefer Australia. I also think that Tinner's Trail is a lighter game, and it's got some kind of randomness in it. There's essentially blind bidding and auctions, and that's a very specific kind of game. You have to be willing to play a game like that where you don't have all the information that you may need, and things may not go your way, and there's definitely room for there to be runaway leaders in Tinner's Trail and for an early lead to just kind of snowball. So I enjoyed Tinner's Trail, but it does have its issues, and it's not going to be a game for everyone. And for people who really want kind of, hard, heavy Euros with no luck, they're probably not going to like Tinner's Trail. I just know that it is I think it's a 4X game, and it's naval themed. And I don't really need to know more than that. Sometimes if there's a movie that I want to see, and I know the director, and I know the actors, and I know that I at least want to go and see it, I tend to not want to get a lot of extra information. I don't want to spoil myself. So this is a new game from Martin Wallace. I'm excited about it. I haven't really looked at it too closely. I just need to play it. I just need to play it and see if I like it and if it's any good and if it's going to be a keeper. I think it will be a keeper along with many of those other games, and I think eventually I probably will remove Tinner's Trail from my collection and just keep Australia. I also backed the Kickstarter for Australia expansions about a year ago. It still hasn't delivered, but I love Australia, and this is going to put more meat on those bones, and so I think the more I kind of build up my Australia IP, the less reason there's going to be to keep Tinner's Trail. Unless I just want to have this kind of easier, quicker, lighter version around, which I don't know that I do. I also got Ashes Reborn, Rise of the Phoenixborn, and that is the new, just published second edition of that. This is a game that I had kind of looked at and come back to and looked at again several times over the last 5 years or so. It's essentially a card battler, so you can do one-on-one. I think you can do multiple people fighting up to 4. Players are going to have their own decks. They're specific to certain factions, and there are a lot of other things that you can add onto the game, like more cards, more factions, things like that. But the original game was kind of going out of print. They did a new second version of the game. I think they cleaned up a few things, so it felt like the right time for me to jump on board, get the game, play it, really see if I like it. So I will do that over time, and I don't know. I don't know whether that's going to be a keeper for me. I don't really have too many kind of card battler games. I had a Game of Thrones, the card game, but I had a previous version of it, and I just didn't love it. I haven't actually sold it yet, but it's sitting on a shelf waiting to be sold, and I don't have too many other games like that. So Ashes, Reborn, Rise of the Phoenixborn could be that game that I want to keep in my collection. I only need 1 or, maybe 2, 3 if I really like that style of game, but I don't really have one right now that I'm solid with. So I'm looking to Ashes to be the one that I kind of keep in my collection and fulfills that need for a card fighter between 2 players, or possibly 3 and 4. I also picked up the newer expansion for Oh My Goods. They originally put out Oh My Goods. It was a competitive card game. And then they put out 2 expansions. And the expansions almost make it a little bit campaigny. And I think those campaigns are more aimed for solo play. And I really like Oh My Goods. So I was excited when I picked up the first expansion, and I was very excited to finally pick up the second expansion. These games are a little harder to find. They're also printed with a European style of cards, so the dimensions are a little bit different than American cards, which means the sleeves are different. I don't know if I have the sleeves right now to sleeve Oh My Goods, and because it's a card game that you're constantly shuffling through, I do want to sleeve that game before I play it. I think I have the original game in sleeves. I just need to get both expansions in sleeves, and I want to do that before I can really play it. Otherwise, I'd have to unsleeve the base game because I'd be mixing the cards together if I had some sleeved and some unsleeved. Madness. So I need to get more sleeves for it before I can play it, and because they are this kind of European sleeve size, I don't think I have extra sleeves just sitting around. So it may be a little while yet before I am able to procure those extra sleeves that I need and then finally get the game to the table in its larger size. But I do love Oh My Goods, and that's something that I'm looking forward to. And maybe I need to take a look at some of these Black Friday sales that the online retailers are doing, because some of them I think are selling sleeves. So maybe I can get the sleeves I need at the right price during that Black Friday sale. Now, I also acquired 4 different versions of Unmatched. I already own Unmatched, Cobble and Fog. This is a light game. It uses deck building, and it's a miniature skirmish game. So you've got a miniature out on a board, and you've got cards that you're kind of cycling through, and on your turn you can use different cards. They do different things. And there are also some variable mechanics. Some of the characters have sidekicks, which are extra characters that help them. So for instance, if you're playing Sherlock Holmes, you're going to have Watson. If you're playing Dracula, you've got, I think, 3 different succubi. And depending which character you're using, the sidekicks kind of are differently powered. So with Dracula, they're just kind of 1 hit point each. But I think there are some characters where you're actually playing another character. Watson may actually be one of them that has his own health dial, and he has more than 1 point. And also in that version of the game, I think, was the Invisible Man and Jekyll and Hyde. And Jekyll and Hyde is a pretty cool character because he flip-flops back and forth between Jekyll and Hyde, and when you want him to be, either version of that character kind of depends on what's happening in the game. So I think Hyde is more of a really powerful fighter, but he can't move well. And he may not have that much defense either, if I'm remembering correctly. Anyway, the point is, there is a high variability in that game. There are lots of different characters. They all play very, very differently. And it's great fun. It's very easy to teach, quick to get to the table, quick to play. And I like that game so much that I just wanted to add in more options. So I got Unmatched Battle of Legends Volume 1, and that comes with 4 other characters. And this one, I believe, was kind of the original base game. There is also a Volume 2 out there. I have not yet acquired that one. I did, however, get Bruce Lee, because he's freaking Bruce Lee. And he's the greatest, and I love Bruce Lee. However, Bruce Lee is a little bit of an oddity because he is sold separately, just 1 character. Everything else in this game... No, I think Deadpool. I think they did Deadpool as a one-off as well. And I probably will eventually add Deadpool because I'm sure he is cool as hell. But in general, if it's not one of the standalone base games like Battle of Legends Volume 1, Volume 2, or Cobble and Fog, which also has 4 characters, all of the other packs have 2 characters each. So Bruce Lee is a little bit of an anomaly. And I did add in 2 of those 2-character packs. The first is Little Red Riding Hood versus Beowulf, which Little Red Riding Hood is going to be cool as hell, I think, because they're going to have to get pretty creative to make her powerful, powerful enough to be balanced with the other characters. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they did and how she works to make her be able to stand on her own. And then Beowulf, of course, has a lot of potential as well. And the other 2-character pack I got was Robin Hood versus Bigfoot. And I think both of those characters are going to be really cool as well. So Unmatched, 4 different versions. Craziness, I know. The last thing that I acquired is Wildlands: The Ancients. Now, I started this section talking about Anno 1800, which is a new Martin Wallace game. And Martin Wallace is best known for Age of Steam and Railways of the World, which are these train games, cube rails, pick up and deliver, as well as some heavy Euros like Brass. So Wildlands is a bit of an anomaly for Martin Wallace. It is a miniature skirmish game and it is very, very light. I believe there's a card element in Wildlands as well, so I think it bears some similarities to Unmatched. I previously acquired the base game as well as a faction expansion called The Unquiet Dead, but The Ancients is its first kind of big expansion with a lot of other content. So I added that to my collection. The crazy thing is I have yet to play Wildlands at all. So now I have kind of 3 different things: the base game, The Ancients, and The Unquiet Dead. I need to play some Wildlands, I think, as well as Unmatched. I need to have a day where I'm just playing a lot of these light, kind of breezy fighting games. But I trust Martin Wallace in general a lot. I think he's a very good designer. I tend to love most of his designs. And I'm really curious to see what he's done with this, kind of very light, especially for him, game that is something that's different than what he usually does and is a different genre. I think designers like him occasionally want to try new things and step outside what they normally do. And this is certainly different for Martin Wallace, and I'm really excited by it. I just need to find some time to get it to the table. Finally, let's talk about the 2 games that I played this period. The first of those is Dinosaur World, and I'm going to be producing a first impressions video for Dinosaur World this week, so you'll see that shortly. But I'm going to give you my thoughts on the game right now. And when I pledged Dinosaur World, I thought that this was going to be a better game than Dinosaur Island, perhaps more complex while also being streamlined, hopefully being less fiddly, and taking up less space on the table. Almost none of those things are true, now that I've played Dinosaur World a couple times. It is very fiddly. There are a lot of components that are fiddly, including these little boredom tokens, which are tiny. They are, I would say, 1/4 centimeter by 1/4 centimeter. They are these tiny little tokens. And every time you go over a tile with your jeeple, which is a meeple in the shape of a jeep. So in Dinosaur World, you're going to be building out your park using tiles, so it's kind of modular. And then during a phase in a round, you'll go around the park in a jeeple, and you'll visit the various locations. And every time you go to a location, the excitement, which eventually translates to income, will decrease on future visits. I guess the idea here is that people have already seen that part of the park, and they're not as excited to go back and see it again. So every time you visit a tile, you're going to put one of these little tiny tokens on that tile, and you're going to have to switch it every time you do that phase, assuming you visit that tile. And these little boredom tokens are just ridiculously tiny. They're really kind of obnoxious. And it almost feels to me like it was a design maybe for a mobile game, and then they decided to adapt it for tabletop, and they just didn't figure out a way to implement some of the little score tracking that would be done in a computer game kind of behind the scenes. So there is that. There is another thing called death tokens that you may get if you encounter dinosaurs in different ways. There is no way to mitigate the death tokens. And at the end of the game, if you have a lot more death tokens than everybody else, you may get a lot of penalty points. On my very first game, I leaned in hard to a certain strategy, and it did not pay off for me. And I was never able to kind of come back and undo some of those death tokens, which means I ended up with like a negative 32 points in an adjustment to my score. So my score was very, very low as a result. I think there are ways to kind of work around that in the game, but you need to be aware of that, which means you need to maybe have played the game a couple times to know how to do things to mitigate for those death tokens, because there's no way to stop them. And that's something that most players aren't going to know on a first or second play, possibly even. So it's a situation where a lot of players playing that game for the first time could be very frustrated by that mechanic. Also, the game is not really a smaller footprint on the table than Dinosaur Island. So it really takes up just as much space. And Dinosaur Island, to me, I really liked the theme of it. That was the best part, as well as the color scheme, because it was all of these bright, neon colors, kind of bright blues and greens and pinks and yellows. Dinosaur World kind of preserves that as well. So it also has a big footprint on the table. It also has this kind of bright color scheme. It does have worker placement. And just like Dinosaur Island, it's not really reinventing the wheel or doing much that's new. There is that puzzly phase where you're taking your Jeep around the park. There's nothing really like that in Dinosaur Island, so it is a new mechanic. I've even heard people comparing Dinosaur Island to Jurassic Park, and then Dinosaur World, the new game, to the sequel, which was called The Lost World, the one that Vince Vaughn was in. I don't know if I'd say that comparison really holds up, but it's interesting to see this kind of dichotomy between the two games, because they are different, Dinosaur Island and Dinosaur World. Now, there is kind of a lot of fiddliness in Dinosaur World, and I don't feel that even once you get around the fiddliness of the design or some of the little tokens and the kind of obnoxious parts of the game, component-wise, there's not really that much in Dinosaur World that is, to me, compelling. I think if you look at that game at the end of the day, best case scenario, it is a decent/solid worker placement game that's not really doing much new for the genre. And while it's good and it is fun, if people like that theme, it's not great. And there are so many games that are kind of in that same genre of worker placement, in that same complexity level of, medium, somewhere between medium light, medium heavy, but kind of in that general medium area. There are so many games that are really good. So for me, a game like Dinosaur World, which I enjoyed playing, and I did get the 3 kind of expansion modules, and I intend to play those and, kind of get some use out of the game before I sell it. And I'll have fun with it while I do. But I don't see the need to keep it in my collection for the long term, because I think at the end of the day, it is just kind of a decent, mediocre, medium weight worker placement game. It's not bad. It's okay. If you like the theme and you like what it's doing, maybe you'll like it more. Maybe it'll be worth buying or keeping for you. But for me, with my ever-growing board game collection, I'm getting to the point where I need reasons to keep games. They have to be excellent. And I think for me, Dinosaur World is probably going to be coming in score-wise around a 7, maybe 7.5, maybe 6.5, probably 7 though. And I just don't think that's a game that's going to be a long-term keeper for me. So it has some fun to it. I'll talk about it more in my first impressions video. If you look at it and you like it, or you play it and you like it and you decide, it's really for you because it appeals to you in different ways, more power to you. I certainly have games in my collection that other people may not think are the greatest games in the world, but they appeal to me in some other way. They're favorites, or they light up some part of my brain, or they appeal to me in some way. So I keep them despite the fact that they're not amazing, just because they have some other level of enjoyment for me, or they fulfill something else. So that certainly could happen for other people for Dinosaur World. But I think for me personally, I actually like Dinosaur Island more, which was surprising because I think Dinosaur Island kind of has a lot of the same problems. It's at the end of the day kind of okay, mediocre, but not doing anything new and not awesome, just kind of cool. But for me, between the two games, now, with hindsight being 2020, I think I actually prefer Dinosaur Island. And there are certain things about Dinosaur Island I really like. I like the way the meeples kind of come into the park and they're touring around the park, and some of them are getting eaten by dinosaurs. It sort of happens in Dinosaur World, but not as much with components. So you've got a Jeep that's driving around the park, and you might get death tokens, which indicated that somebody died somehow. And if you use your brain, you realize it's because a dinosaur ate them. But it doesn't feel as kind of obvious as the way the people actually do get eaten in Dinosaur Island. And I really like that aspect of Dinosaur Island. So I think for me, I'm going to get some more play out of Dinosaur World. I'll play the various expansion modules, but eventually I'm going to sell it, and then I'll probably try to get Dinosaur Island into my collection. That is a game, though, that is getting hard to find, I think, in all of its completeness, especially if you want a new or near new copy. So who knows? I'm hoping, maybe down the line they'll do a second edition of Dinosaur Island or do another Kickstarter for it. And maybe at that point I can jump into it and kind of pick up all of the stuff at once, because I like to get everything. I am a completist, and I don't want to get, a lesser version of Dinosaur Island or a version that is missing certain things. The other game that I played this period is Grand Austria Hotel. Now, I am not planning on doing a first impressions video for Grand Austria Hotel because it's not a new game. It is a second edition, a remake of an older game. They also did it in conjunction with a new expansion. It's called Let's Waltz. There are 5 different modules in that expansion. So one of them adds in ballrooms, which is this whole big additional mechanic that is added into the game. There is also an expansion called Celebrities, which gives you a different kind of card to interact with and some powers that you can activate periodically throughout the course of the game. And those 2 expansions are supposed to be the bigger 2 expansions. And if you put both of them in the game together, they extend the length of the game and make it a lot crunchier. There are also 3 other expansions in the Let's Waltz kind of expansion box that are smaller modules. So you can add those in, kind of mix and match them. But the 2 big ones are the ballrooms and the celebrities. Now, the base game of Grand Austria Hotel is essentially a dice drafting game. Players are going to be rolling a ton of dice every round at the top, and then depending on what numbers of dice are rolled and kind of in what volume, you will be able to take different actions, and the strength of those actions will be variable depending on how many dice of that kind have been rolled for that round. So players will use those dice, they'll draft them in turn order, and they'll use them to take actions. And those actions will be things like getting food or drink to put on cards that you have acquired, that you have drafted into your hotel. You will need to placate those guests and satisfy them and give them all of the specific resources that they want. Once you do that, you can then take usually a bonus on the bottom of the card, and it's different for every card. So a lot of the fun of the game and the variability of the game is choosing what cards to put in your cafe, thinking, I think I'm going to need this power when this activates. Like I'm going to need money, or I'm going to need to go up on that Emperor track, or I'm going to need this ability to pull another guest into my cafe for free, or maybe I get to put this guest into 2 rooms instead of 1. And that's another thing that happens in the game. After you kind of placate them and give them what they need, you then can put them in a room in your hotel. Before you do that, you will need to have acquired the room and paid for the room and prepared the room. And that's kind of an additional step. But once those rooms are waiting, you can then, once you've given that card all of the food or drink that it wants, move that person into the hotel. Now, there are player boards, and there's a side where it is kind of identical from player to player. There is also a side that is variable, so it's different for players. And those maps essentially will have different collections of rooms by color, red, yellow, and blue. And when you fill a block of rooms, you will also get a bonus. And depending on the color, that bonus could be more money, it could be victory points, or it could be spaces on the Emperor track. So there are a lot of kind of different mechanics happening in Grand Austria Hotel. It's not an overly complex game, which I think puts in this really cool category, kind of like Concordia, where you can teach the game to lighter gamers. It's not too difficult for most people. Yet at the same time, it's got really good choices of impact so that heavier gamers are going to be engaged when they play Grand Austria Hotel And it's not going to be a game that they don't want to play because they think, it's a lighter game. It operates on this medium kind of middle ground area, and it has really, really good choices, and it's a game that I think everybody can play. So you're going to be scoring victory points for these various guests throughout the game as you put them into rooms. And then at the end of the game, you will also score points for the various rooms. They'll score more points depending on what floor they're in. Sometimes those blocks of rooms for certain colored rooms will score points. Certain rooms have victory point bonuses on them as well. You also have a different set of cards called staff cards that you'll start out with 6 of those. There'll be ways in the game possibly to acquire more. But those staff cards will do things like give you ongoing powers or possibly give you conditions for end of game scoring, or possibly give you one-time use abilities. So it's kind of a mix and match with those cards, but they give you kind of more variability in your game and allow you to do different things. There's also goals, 3 random goals that you're going to select for every game. And so if you fulfill those goals, you'll get the victory points for those as well. And those kind of score in player order. So the first player to score any of those goals will score more points than the player who scores at second or the player who scores at third. But Grand Austria Hotel, to me, I've played it twice now, just the base game. It's just a great combination of mechanics. It plays really smoothly. It's a joy to play. And now that I've played it twice, I feel like I have a good handle on the base game. I'm happy playing the base game by itself many more times, but I'm also ready now to start putting some of the expansions into it and seeing how they work and, just kind of opening up that gameplay experience. Now, as I said, I do not plan to do a first impressions video on Grand Austria Hotel because I've reserved those videos for games that are brand new. And that means that doesn't include games that are reprints or remakes. However, I love Grand Austria Hotel. It's a really good game. I want to keep coming back to it. I want to keep playing it. So I'm anticipating at some point in the future, I will do a full teach-in review for Grand Austria Hotel, and I will do it at a time when I can also review and evaluate all of that expansion content. So it's something that you can be looking for in the future, but not the near future. I think that is definitely a video that I don't think I will try to produce until at least 2022. Now, before I end this video, let's quickly address what's coming. So I'm recording this video on a Saturday. I'm hoping to get it edited and posted tomorrow on Sunday. That may be difficult because a friend of mine who is going to eventually appear in these videos with me is coming over, and we're going to be playing some games tomorrow. We're going to play Unsettled for the first time, and he wanted to play Wasteland Express Delivery Service, and if we have any more time, we may try to sneak in a game of Brew. So that's happening tomorrow, and that also means that I eventually will be doing a first impressions video for Unsettled. However, before I get to that, here's what's coming first. I will be producing a first impressions video for Dinosaur World. I'll also be doing a Kickstarter weekly next week, and I do plan to do that in the time period that I should be getting these produced, which means I'll be shooting it Thursday and filming it Friday. The first video that I'll probably try to get produced, if I have the time to do it next week, will be my October Game of the Month video. I just did my September Game of the Month video last week, so I will try to get in the October Game of the Month video next week, which will allow me to then do the November Game of the Month video once we hit that first week of December, and then I'll be on a good track for those videos moving forward. If I have time beyond that, I probably would put out a full teach-in review for Chronicles of Crime 1400, and then the next thing after that will likely be a first impressions video for Unsettled. I don't think beyond that I'll be getting any more videos done next week, so for videos moving past that, I'll be talking about that next week during next week's What's Coming. And you'll probably want to tune in for that because that will be a slate of all new information. Right now, the videos that I'm talking about, there is a little bit of overlap in terms of what I've talked about in the past. I did get a first impressions video out recently over the weekend for Coffee Traders, as well as that September Game of the Month video that featured Coffee Traders and Grand Austria Hotel. But Dinosaur Island is coming. Another Kickstarter weekly is coming. October Game of the Month video is coming, and possibly Chronicles of Crime Teach and Review is coming. And then after that, Unsettled First Impressions. If you're still around at the end of this long video, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. Please remember to like and subscribe, especially if you want to help support me in producing future content. Have a great week. Play all the amazing games that you can. I'm going to try to do that as well. I'll report back to you in the future with more videos based on what I play and what I think. Keep your eyes peeled for all of the future content coming, and I will see you very soon. Thank you, take care, and goodbye.